Motion carried.
Senator McFedrin.
Thank you very much, Your Honour. I would very much like to be able to speak from my place on the order paper, if I may, please. I believe it is my parliamentary right to do so.
Required Senator. Senator Plett.
Your Honour, we have had some discussions amongst leadership. The issue that Senator McFedrin wants to speak about, I believe, is fairly time-sensitive. So in light of that, we in our Conservative caucus would be prepared to give leave on the condition that that is the last item on the order paper and that the Senate adjourn when Senator McFedrin is done speaking.
That Senator McFedrin
Agreed.
So ordered.
Inquiries, interpellation number 6.
Honourable Senator, before Senator McFedrin speaks, I wish to inform the Senate that she will be exercising her right of final reply, and her speech will have the effect, according to Rule 612, of closing debate on this inquiry. Senator McFedrin.
Merci, Monsieur Président.
Thank you, Minister. As a senator from Manitoba, I recognize that I live on the land of Treaty 1, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, and Dene, and also the land of the Métis Nation. I would like to highlight the fact that the Parliament of Canada is located on Algonquin Anishinaabe land that is unceded and has not been restituted. I would also like to underline that many people throughout Turtle Island are with us today, whether they are on ceded or unceded land. I would like to thank all of those who have taken the time to think about and study the issues in my inquiry with regard to our unique institution, our model of governmental autonomy, and our moral commitment to offer our citizens a modernized, transparent, responsible Senate that is equitable in all ways. We have a number of functions, the most important of which is public responsibility and accountability. Many of you have reached out to me in private to talk about this issue in greater detail, and I've found those discussions to be enlightening and motivating. I would particularly like to thank Senator McCullum, who spoke out publicly on certain key aspects of senatorial equity. After that conversation, I would like to propose some changes to our use of parliamentary privilege with regard to the public disclosure of financial information, as well as a transparency in inquiries as well. I also suggest that our rules be amended so that they can be more clearly interpreted. So I hope that the Senate's Committee on Ethics and Conflict of Interest will take into consideration the suggestions that I sent them on this matter. However, the subject of this inquiry goes beyond specific requests to a single senatorial committee.
I rise this evening, first, to thank you for listening. I acknowledge that your leaders decided on a different course for this evening, but I hope you will forgive me for asking for my rights to speak in accordance with our Senate rules when you hear what I feel compelled to say. To say to you, my colleagues, to whom I feel I owe the courtesy of first telling my truth and sharing evidence of what I did and why, believing then and now that my efforts which were never solitary and never attention-seeking, were in good faith, dedicated to trying to save lives with a focus on women and girls. I'm very grateful for the fact that I can cry and speak at the same time. To close my inquiry, I bring to you another case study that illustrates many of the complex issues that this inquiry has encouraged for consideration. The case study is my own, and I respectfully invite you to assess the actions taken based on the evidence that I share with you here. I stand today because of my desire to share this evidence first with you, my colleagues in this chamber. And I need to underscore that those I name in presenting this evidence were and remain to me trusted, diligent, and compassionate officials, for the most part, who should be commended, not reviled or used as an excuse for promises not met by Canada. On September 21st and 22nd, 2022, the Globe and Mail published front-page articles naming Immigration, Refugees, Resettlement Canada, IRCC, as the primary source for their articles, but anonymously. Those headlines included, quote, Canadian senator sent documents to Afghan family that weren't authentic, Ottawa says. And, quote, senator sent inauthentic documents to stranded Afghans, accusing me of issuing inauthentic, or, in the words of one of the reporters when she wrote to one of the NGOs I was working with, quote, fake documents, unquote. From Global Affairs Canada to Afghans, mostly women seeking to save their lives and escape the resurgent Taliban regime. Colleagues, I need to say this to you in person. This is not true. It is not true on the facts, and it has been grievous in impact, reducing my effectiveness to try to evacuate Afghan women still trapped and in hiding and at extreme risk, and those we have managed to get out because we have managed to get many out, and to help them resettle, to help them survive whatever country they got dumped in, whether it was Albania or Pakistan, while they wait and wait and wait to come to Canada, as we promised them they could. Beyond immediately stating to the reporter my innocence of these allegations and asserting that the documents in question were very much authentic and provided to me by trusted, high-level government officials, I chose to stay quiet, shielding those officials and advocates, but this is no longer an option as of tomorrow. In support of Afghan applicants who are taking IRCC to court, I am providing an affidavit tomorrow, and it is important to me to provide my evidence first to you, my honorable colleagues in this chamber. I was a feminist, activist, lawyer for 40 years before being appointed to this august place. And now I am a feminist, activist senator. That's who I am. My advocacy in supporting Afghan women and girls to live their rights predates the August 2021 disastrous Western exit from Kabul by more than 20 years, working with many organizations, including the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, the Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, and I have traveled to Afghanistan with the Canadian Armed Forces to meet with officials on security issues affecting Afghan women and girls. Many senators in this chamber have deep connections and involvement in defending and advancing human rights and protections for Afghans, especially Afghan women and girls. To anyone who knows the region, the Taliban resurgence was not the surprise often portrayed by some media, In February 2020, when former President Trump signed the U.S.-Taliban deal that signaled the U.S. troop withdrawal, experts the world over raised warnings about what was going to happen, and it did. To its credit, the Globe and Mail ran a January 2022 article by the founding chair of the Afghan Human Rights Commission and former Afghan Deputy Prime Minister, Dr. Seema Samar, whom I'm honored to say I've known since 2001, warning of a looming catastrophe and pleading with Canada to act decisively to save lives. While I am proud of my advocacy for evacuating Afghan women parliamentarians, athletes, and young human rights defenders on the Taliban kill list, I am also so proud of and grateful to colleagues with whom I have worked before, during, and after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, including Senators Beam, Omidvar, Otalajan, Marty Deacon, Jaffer, Platt, Husakis, Dasko, Pate, Ravalia, Simons, and Patterson, Ontario, to help Afghans find safety. Many of us have reached out to Prime Minister Trudeau and other high-level officials imploring action long before the fall of Kabul. Many more have been advocating to IRCC on behalf of Afghan families currently held in various states of limbo in the bureaucratic nightmare of immigration processing. Many of us have collaborated with federal, international, and civil society organizations and networks to facilitate this work. That's what senators can choose to do. And many of us are still doing it almost every day. My own outreach during that period included Canadian ministers, ministry officials, ambassadors, U.S. and international counterparts, military, multilateral organizations such as the Interparliamentary Union. Our collective goal was always to maximize the number of Afghan lives we could save. In the context of the announcement on August 13, 2021, 2 days before the fall of Kabul, and the same day as a federal election was called, on the 15th, IRCC Minister Marco Mendicino, Minister of Foreign Affairs Mark Garneau, and Minister of Defense Harjit Sajjan, who, by the way, it's kind of odd that the Women and Gender Equality Minister, born in Afghanistan, wasn't part of that group, but put that in brackets. They made a joint announcement, and I'll quote, "Canada will resettle 20,000 vulnerable Afghans threatened by the Taliban and forced to flee Afghanistan. We will introduce a special program to focus on particularly vulnerable groups that are already welcomed through existing resettlement streams, including women leaders, human rights defenders, journalists, persecuted religious minorities, LGBTI individuals, and family members of previously settled interpreters," end of quote. Time doesn't allow detailing of the mounting danger and chaos at the Kabul airport, also often referred to as HKIA, the key exit point for Afghans seeking to flee, and where international forces, including our Canadian soldiers, held a rapidly deteriorating perimeter protecting access to the airfield, the only place in Afghanistan not controlled by the Taliban, after the fall of Kabul on August 15th. I'm sure you remember those images of bodies falling off rolling airplanes and Canadian planes taking off nearly empty. Nevertheless, my experience of most Canadian officials, especially members of the Canadian Armed Forces, was their earnest efforts to help vulnerable Afghans, to go to the edge of their limits and do their best to help. But their good intentions could not undo a perfect storm of crippling failures in communication, coordination, and administrative roadblocks that combined to guarantee those failures. Not only were Afghans being shot, beaten, and choked with tear gas, but I kept getting reports from Afghan women that even when they made it to the line of Western soldiers around the airport, they were denied access and often told they needed a form. But at that point, no one was defining what form. It was often up to soldiers to make these life or death decisions because embassy officials were gone or they were very busy leaving, creating a vacuum, as reported in one newspaper, quoting an advocate, leaving a vacuum of official government-run mechanisms for those most at risk to have safe passage out of the country. In short, the Canadian promises announced through Ministers Mendocino, Sajan, and Garneau to evacuate and resettle 20,000 vulnerable Afghans were not working very well on the ground. By August 22nd, a week after Kabul fell, media reported that, quote, at a news conference, Mr. Sajan said that Canadian Special Forces are empowered to do what is necessary to get people out, end of quote. Minister Sajan was quoted to say also, quote, our troops have all the flexibility to be able to make the appropriate decisions so they can take actions.
Senator, are you asking for 5 more minutes?
Full.
Is leave granted, honourable senators? Agreed. Senator McFedrin.
Key within the kind of communications that were happening day and night was a small circle of high officials into which I had been invited by Minister Monsef. And I asked to bring in a consultant that had been working with me for a number of years because she was a member of a national team here in Canada, and I had been asked to help hundreds, many more athletes than I was already trying to help parliamentarians and human rights defenders, and I just didn't have more hours in the day. That circle, that email circle, I have every email. They are dated, they are stamped, the authorities are named within them, and I tell you here tonight, that template that we used to try and help, and we have succeeded, and when I say we, I mean a network from Denmark to Zurich to Australia to Canada to the United States, everyone doing their best, but we used what's called a visa facilitation letter. And I got it. It was conveyed to us, to our group, by the Chief of Staff for the then Defense Minister. And if somebody can't trust that as a source, I don't know what source you can look to. And that document, and I obviously can't detail all of the emails, but I have all of the evidence. It is readily available to any of you who want to see everything I have from that time period. It is anticipated that there will be a third article with similar headlines. We'll just have to deal with that. But the affidavit that I need to finish tonight is because 6 Afghans at extreme risk are taking IRCC to court, and I hope I can be helpful to them. Thank you very much. Merci. Miigwech.